Come one, come all, gather round for episode number 9 of the Mind Body Story podcast. I am your host, Eric Beach, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about hills. We're going to talk about running them specifically and kind of what lessons we can learn about life, or what lessons I've learned about life in my start in this triathlon training world a few years ago, and how hills really played a part in this first realization that, hey, maybe there's actually a connection between the mental growth that can occur and the empowered life that I can live based on simply running hills and observing what the hills had to teach me based on what my mind was telling me, where my mind was going when I was on these hills. So to give a little background, the point where I started to train for triathlon, the point where I'd said I need to get physical, was really kind of an interesting part of my life, because I was in a crisis of sorts and needed to make a change. And triathlon was one of those things that had always been in the back of my mind that would be really cool to do someday, but I didn't really ever think that I would. So it came to become a reality. But what caused it, the shift to actually take this on, was I was in this battle. I was depressed. I didn't know who I was, what I was supposed to be doing. I was in school and just overwhelmed, and for years wanted to go back into the military, wanted to, become an FBI special agent, CIA operative, something, a security contractor, go back overseas, all these things, even, just police officer, these high stakes jobs, these big risks. And it really didn't fit in. None of those really fit into the family dynamic that we had created. And so they were just like, oh, this would make me happy. And then I realized underneath all of that, because usually when there's something that's that strong, it's not necessarily the job that you want. It's replacing something that you miss. When you think about missing the military, it's usually not the military you miss, because you're just like in a breakup. If months go by and you start to miss that girl or guy, it's not that you miss them. It's that you've forgotten all the reasons that you broke up with them, and that there was a breakup in the first place, right? So we remember the great parts, which might have been a fraction of the total time spent, but we romanticize those. And so with the Army, we can do that too. But then you realize, okay, well, underneath all of that, I don't miss early formation. I don't miss raking rocks. I don't miss picking up cigarette butts that weren't mine. And you start remembering all the stuff that you didn't like, which really made up the bulk of the day in and day out of being an Army guy. So it wasn't that. And I was like, what is it about the military that I miss? What is it that these other jobs provide that I think I need and that I think I want and I think would make me happy? And I kind of realized physicality. I was in the best shape of my life. I was using my body, and I enjoyed that I was in an environment, in a job that provided me a need to use my body. And I had not done that. I had gained, 40 pounds. I'm trying to think of the actual number, but it was something around 40 pounds. I was not running. I was not training, and I missed the physicality. So what can I do? Well, triathlon had always been in the back of my mind, like I said earlier, so I decided that was the time that I'm going to go start training and go for a triathlon. And I was like, well, what's a triathlon? I don't even know the first place to get started. And so I looked up, researched online what a triathlon was, found out there's all these different distances. There's sprints, there's Olympics, there's halves, there's fulls. And so I looked at them and was like blown away by what a full distance triathlon was. 140.6 mile race. I'm like, nah. Okay, half that is it's 70.3. I was like, that's still too far. The furthest I've gone is like a 5K, and that was a couple years after I got out of the military. Now it's, going over 10 years. So Olympic, still too far. I wasn't confident I could do it, but a sprint, I was like, I can do a 5K. That's the run. And this was a super sprint, because that's a subdivision of the sprint triathlon that's even shorter. And so, a sprint triathlon is maybe like an 800-meter swim. The super sprint's like 400 meters. And the bikes vary between them. And so the one that I found was in my neighborhood. It was in my town. I was in Wilmore, Kentucky, but this one was within like a half hour. So that one was a 400-meter swim, a 13.1 mile bike, and then a 5K. And I was like, I can do the bike and the run, maybe not pretty, but I can do it. So I'm confident. That's good. I've never swam for anything other than fun in my life, so that scared me. And so I took on these things, signed up, and just committed to it, and was learning how to swim and doing all these things. And that's where the journey got interesting, because I was doing it for regaining physicality, but I started to run. and was really, at first, it was really hard. It was miserable, if I'm being honest. I'd see people say like, I love running. And I was like, I do not love running. I don't know who you are or what's wrong with you to say that you love running, because I will never like getting up early and I will never like running, let alone love it. And so it was miserable. And the reason it was miserable initially was because I, in the Army, could run 6-minute miles, or, average for distance 7 something. And that was what I considered, my standard, which is fast in retrospect. I didn't feel like it was fast, but now when I stepped out onto the road and I was running a 13-minute mile or something like that, I was like, that's double. Like, it was double what I used to do in the Army. And this was like grueling. And in the Army, it was like I could have gone harder. But now I'm struggling, like falling apart, having to sit down and just like sit in front of a fan for a half hour just to cool my body down. And it's a 13-minute mile. And the other part of it was part of my problem was that I had this victim mindset that felt like I was entitled. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I had a lot of entitlement. And what that looked like in the running world was that I felt like I deserved a flat track. I deserved to live in an area that was flat because, hey, I'm just getting started. So I don't want to have too many obstacles preventing me from running fast. And in Wilmore, Kentucky, that place was hilly. There wasn't a whole lot of place you could go without going up or down some kind of hill consistently throughout whatever distance run you were going on. And that was very annoying and very demoralizing for me. And I felt like I deserved better. And I didn't. I felt like quitting. And, like I said, I felt it was unfair. I had to learn on these hills and on a flat surface. And I'm just building my strength. So you shouldn't be here, hills. I'm just learning. I need training wheels. I deserve these things. But life doesn't offer us nice environments. Life is life regardless of what we believe it should be. We get the parents we get regardless of what we think we needed in a parent, regardless of what we wanted in a parent. We get what we get, and that's the life situation. That's the world that we're living in. So I can't expect to change the hills. And I can't expect to deserve that somehow if it was flatter, I would have a better experience. No, I'm in the environment. We're in our environment. We have to operate within it. We have to accept where we are. And I was not accepting where I was. So that was the first lesson I had to really overcome, to say, I've got to accept that I'm not going to drive an hour away just so I can run on a track or something. Like, I have to do this here and now, because otherwise it's not going to fit into my daily life. And it's up to us to learn how to adapt to that environment. And that's so key and crucial to any kind of physical training or life development if we're going to become better people than who we are. And by better, I mean more who we are. Not a better version of ourselves because we're trying to change and be something different, but we're trying to connect with who we are. And innately, because you exist as a person, a human being, you have worth, you have value. But we've sacrificed so much of who that person was to fit into this peer group, to make this person like us, to make this person love us, to be accepted. We've gotten rid of so many pieces of the authentic pie that we were, that we've left with a sliver of our authentic self. And so rediscovering all those pieces makes us connected to that person, and we are always someone of value. We are changing to become more of who we are, the original person that was that child that sacrificed so much just to fit in. That's what I'm talking about, becoming a better person, becoming more you. So me, I had to learn to like hills. I had to learn to accept them, and I didn't. I quit on almost every single hill I encountered, and there were many. Some little ones I could get up, but the other ones I couldn't. I was always walking up them, throwing little pity parties on the way up, and I'll start running on the backside of this hill, but I'm not running up the rest. And so this happened over and over and over, because when you're training for an event, you're training the run. I was going, 3 times a week for months. And I started to think, I've always been kind of a creative at heart. I have the mind that's very sensitive, which, looked like a bad thing, but it was one of my strengths, is my sensitivity and awareness of my environment. Like, I was super aware of everything that was going on around me, and I made everything, as my paranoia would lend itself to, everything was something else. There was a secret meaning behind a handshake or a certain glance that I received that was completely benign, but it would become something so big to reinforce my own narrative, my victim mindset and things like that. But it helped me here, because that wasn't a curse. It really was a gift. It's just that I was really misguided in how I used it. And so I applied it to this, and I'm just when you're running, you kind of get into a meditative place. You're processing things, you're trying to get through it mentally. And I started to notice I would stop at the exact same part on every hill. And I was like, man, every hill I get to, I'm noticing that I'm quitting. Why? Is there a reason? And I noticed that it was about 90% of the way up the big hills that I would stop. And I thought, man, I have to be able to make it the rest of the 10%. There's something that's blocking me from doing it because 10% is so small in comparison to how big this hill was. And so I started to push and say, well, let me see if I can make that last 10%. Maybe I can make it all the way up the hill. And I did. I could fight through the last 10% of that hill. I could do it. And then I started to think, man, if I overcame this here, let me look at my life, the way I'm living my life. Is there any correlation? Because if I'm going to push my body this hard and I know I'm hurting that bad mentally and I'm depressed and I'm in despair, there has to be some lesson here for me to learn. And that was my first lesson in this whole process was the hills. And I noticed that when do I quit tasks? When do I feel overwhelmed? And sometimes I don't quit them, but when do I want to? When do I want to bail? And I started noticing it was 90% of the way through the project. Because what happens after you get 90% of the way through? That last 10% is tedium. It's the tedium of life task. It's the logistics. It's the paperwork. Everything we do. The creative experience is a lot of brainstorming and visualizing and all these things, and that's great. And that's the bulk of what I love. But then there would be these tasks of, worksheets and screenplay, like different parts of shot lists and different things and editing the script or the poem or the whatever. It was that 10%. Like, I don't want to rewrite my book. I don't want to rewrite anything. I just want to put it out there and then just be done with it. I don't want the 10%. And so what I started to tell myself was, if I can get through the 10% on this hill physically, can I get through the 10% of the tedium in life tasks? And I could. And I was like, man, is this physical fitness, is triathlon training the arena wherein I do discover the battles that I have within myself? And is that where I do battle? And that directly translates into my life. And it did. So we can look at where we quit. Where we quit in a task. Even if you're not training right now, where do you quit? Where does the job get so hard and so just... I don't want to do this anymore. Where is that point? Is it the 10%? Because you can overcome that. And using fitness to break through that 10% barrier is nice. It is safe. And you prove to yourself how strong you actually are, that you can push through barriers, whether they're mental or physical, you can push through them. And it's possible. And these are reworking your muscles. And it does if you allow it to, if you are aware and embrace this idea that what we do on the training run correlates to what we do in the office or in the job or in the relationship. That 10% tedium is what makes the marriage work or makes the relationship work, because it's the parts that you don't want to do. And you have to do those things if you want anything to work out. It's just the way life is. We can't change that landscape. And so that was lesson number 1. And I thought, man, if that's a lesson, what else is out here? And so I started looking and analyzing at the rest of what I did, what I chose to do on my runs. I noticed that when I got over the hill, I rested on the way down. My philosophy was I survived the hill. Now I've crested it. The bear went over the hill. What's on the other side of the hill? Another hill. And so you would have this process of like, I just did this one hill. I am not doing another hill. Not so soon. Give me a break. And so I would rest on the way down and run slow, real slow, just because I wanted to build up the energy reserve so I could take on this next hill. And I noticed that frustration. What was that? Why am I so frustrated that there's another hill? Of course there's another hill. I live on Earth. I live in Kentucky where there are a lot of hills. It's unrealistic for me to expect there not to be, so I should not be surprised. Plus, this is the same route that I run every time, so I shouldn't be surprised. I just worked hard, and you want me to do that again? Like that's the voice, that one right there. What do I do in my work life? Okay, I get a project. I get through the 10%. I work really hard to get it done, and I do, and I produce it. Now, maybe I'm happy about it. Maybe I'm not satisfied. Whatever it is, I just busted my ass trying to get this thing done, and I did it. And now I want to take a break. I don't want to do that again. But then what happens is you can't do that. You don't get to rest on your laurels. There's another project. I mean, if you want to get paid, if you want to be employable and stay employed, you've got to go and do the work again. And so that was one of my battles. Maybe you don't have that battle, but that was part of mine is I wanted to take a break because I worked really hard and I extended myself physically and mentally, and I just didn't feel like I had the reserves to do it again. And part of that was fear. I was afraid of failing. I was afraid if I go at it again, I won't be strong enough, and this time I won't make it up the hill. This time I won't produce a quality product. And so I rested on the way down the hill. And then I noticed one day, this is where the philosophy really shifted for me, was I noticed that I was resting so much that I was walking down the hill. But when I was walking, I was almost going so slow that I was not growing anything. I was not benefiting at all from even the rest. Like, you've got to maintain momentum because the slower you go, your body starts to tighten up. And I'm not saying you should sprint the whole way through, but objects in motion tend to stay in motion, right? And so if I'm walking now, my hips tighten. And then when I do start running again, it's a lot harder because I rested too much. If I take too much time off between projects, the next time I start, I'll have been so used to doing nothing and resting that I won't have the strength, and my body and my mind won't allow me to go to the places I need to go to actually take on and enjoy the next part of this process. Even the 90% that I did enjoy, I won't enjoy it because I'll just be so used to this comfort of my cave, my mental cave, where I can go hide away from everything that makes me uncomfortable. So you have to continue moving forward. And so I started to run down the hill. And I didn't always like it. I still am learning because there is a technique to running down the hill. But I learned that when I kept moving, I was able to go into the next hill and conquer it much better than when I would walk down the hill. When we don't avoid it and we embrace it, we grow stronger. We can handle more. That's the whole point of training our bodies, is that we can only do this right now. But if we go a little bit beyond it, we can do a little bit more over time. This is a long process. My journey to, fast PRs and personal bests and all these things is growth over time. It's not my season. I go through last place almost in Ironman France to Kona qualifying, first place the next year. It's not realistic, and I will burn myself out and hurt myself if I try to do that. So just finding the flow, finding consistent movement forward. I learned that on the backside of a hill. And embracing it, we do grow stronger, and I did. And the other thing that you find is in running hills, in running in general, why I love endurance sport, you have a lot of time to think. And your body and mind wander. And when you're on a longer distance or time frame, voices will come up. And it doesn't take an hour. I'm not saying you have to work out for an hour, but voices will come up when the adversity comes up with the physical effort. When the hills get to be too numerous, when the hills get to be too steep, too long, the voices will enter. And that is a unique thing that happens in training. And the nice thing about it is you can converse with those voices because you have the endorphins to back it up, to not make it so traumatic, to not judge it so hard. And the voice that came up for me, there's been many inner voices that have come up. And what I mean by that is not literally I'm like hallucinating and I'm having a conversation with some mythical person from the past, or some angel or anything like that. It's my feelings coming up. So when I was running these hills initially, my voice that came to my head was a whiny little kid. Yeah, a whiny kid that was, it's too hard. I want to go home. Why are you doing this? It's hot. This hill is too big. It was that kind of voice. Oh, woe is me. Pity me. Even though I was choosing to do these things. And so that was a good voice for me to hear because I knew that was a very much piece of who I was. And as I went forward, I knew I couldn't just silence it because I didn't want to, because what I'm trying to do is understand myself better. So if I silence that voice again and try to man up, I lose it. Because that sensitivity, that whiny kid, that was my sensitivity. It was just way tuned up. But I didn't want to get rid of it because sensitivity makes me so human and makes me so empathetic, and I think strengthens me. It's one of my best strengths, is being sensitive and aware of my surroundings and how I make people feel. But you've got to dial it back because it's impossible to make everyone happy all the time. It's not healthy. And so I knew that, and I could have conversations with that kid. And as I pushed forward and grew, I showed that kid that I was stronger than I ever thought I would be. And that kid was a part of who I was. But when it's time to go, we go, buddy. Like, this is, you get on my shoulders, I'm a strong man. I embrace you. But right now it's time to work. I can't whine anymore. I'm empowering myself, but come with me. Don't go away. Because one of the worst things we can do is silence those pieces of ourselves, because it's like essentially locking that kid in a closet saying, shut up. We would never do that to our children. We would never do that to a person that we cared about. And that's a person that we should care about because it's us. But it's just a misguided piece of ourselves that we haven't addressed. And that whiny kid was my sensitivity that actually became a very big asset and strength to me. And I wouldn't have found that. I wouldn't have been able to have those conversations if I wasn't out there moving my body. I always say, move your body if you want to journey inward, because it's the safest way you can do it. Naturally occurring chemicals will help you do it. The runner's high is great, but when we use the runner's high, quote unquote, as a way to be objective and take a self-inventory and look at what our part in that last conflict and that last fight was, why we quit the things we quit, why we whine about the things we whine about, why we think we're entitled to anything, that's what the runner's high can do for us. That's what hills showed me and can show you. No matter where you are on fitness level, there's always a barrier that you hit and those voices come in. Do not run away from them, because that is the benefit of the psyche over the physique. The physique is a side effect to these wonderful life lessons that we learn on the hills or on the course, wherever it is that you're racing or lifting weights. That's the real benefit, is the psyche over the physique. A six-pack is a side effect. A wonderful side effect that I hope to have someday. But as long as I'm healthy and healing, then I'm happy, man. And when we have these seemingly disempowered voices enter, we gotta reframe them. Find the good. That was a powerful thing in my own journey, the powerful start of triathlon for me. Whiny equaled sensitivity. Oh, I can embrace sensitivity. Not whiny, I can embrace sensitivity. I'm a quitter. Well, that's very disempowering, but when you're a quitter, is it that you want to quit? Or is it a misguided voice saying, I desire to grow and be better than we are? Because that's why you're quitting, is because you want to be better, you want to be stronger than you are, but you think it's too hard or you don't know how it's possible. So we become a quitter. Reframe it. Oh, I want to quit. So what that means is I'm confusing the message. The converse of that is I want to grow so badly and so fast, but I don't have the patience to do it or the understanding of how to do it. Then you go find someone who can help you do it. But don't get rid of that. Just be aware of when it comes up that the message is actually your desire to grow. When we're angry, we have an unmet expectation, we have fear, we have all these things. But what if your anger is actually your strength to fight the good fight? The thing is, when you're angry and you try to suppress anger, it never goes away. But if you redirect anger into strength to fight for the good fight, even if you don't know what the good fight is, now you want to find it. Now you want to find it, and you're saying, I don't want to fight to hurt people. I want to fight to defend them, even if that defense is my inner child that I'm trying to defend and foster. Use that anger and say, that is just my misguided strength to fight the good fight. And I'm going to stop fighting my spouse. I'm going to stop fighting the people at work. And every time I feel that anger, realize that it's my strength saying, hey, you can fight the good fight. This one might not be a good fight, but you want to go fight a good one. So let's go find a good reason to use this passion. You're depressed. What is that? Depression is the insight necessary to understand that we need to let go of something, a way of being, a false belief we're believing about ourselves. Depression is always present when we need to let go of a behavior. So when I get depressed, I still get depressed, and it's maybe lower grade than it used to be in the past. But now whenever it comes, I know I say, oh, I'm depressed again. I'm in despair. So I don't know what the lesson is, what I need to change, what I need to let go of. But I know it's going to come out, and I'm going to figure it out, and I'll be better for it. That's empowering. We need to reframe the negative emotions that we feel, the negative feelings that come up, and sit with that and reframe it. Find out how that can actually be an empowering, good quality that you have. Train, move your body, and then have those conversations with yourself. Because if you do, you'll have the good feeling chemicals in your brain, that runner's high, those endorphins, and they'll help you do so with objectivity. That is the beauty of training, and that is what started this whole process for me. This is why the podcast exists. This is how I've done anything in my life that's positive, is it all started by me running hills and doing a really tough self-inventory daily, after training, during training, and letting that stuff come in, because it was gold in there. There was so much gold for me to mine out, and I'm still mining out. So don't let go of it. Reframe your beliefs about yourself on the other side of training or during. So that's all for today. There are so many lessons in a hill. I mean, the rise and fall, the ups and downs of life. I mean, there's a lot in there, and I hope you go out and you can find your own way that the hill can teach you, and I would love to hear how it impacts you, what lessons you learned, because I'm trying to learn too, my friends. So please feel free to share that. I would love to hear how you guys are learning and how you guys are growing through physical activity and self-discovery. But until next time, until next week, thank you for joining me, and journey well, my friends. This podcast is presented by Project Echelon, the nonprofit that races for veterans and helps them heal through endurance sport and self-discovery.